My daughter-in-law walked into my kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon and set a stack of papers down on my counter like she was laying a body to rest. The lunch rush was still going. Every stool at the counter was full. Mr. Abernathy had his coffee. The Wilson girls were splitting a slice of sweet potato pie in the back booth like they did every week. And Vanessa, my son's wife, in her cream-colored coat that cost more than my monthly water bill, stood in the middle of all of it and said loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Mama Olivia, it's time. It's time to let this go with some dignity." She tapped the papers with one manicured finger. A sale agreement. My name already printed on the line where they wanted me to sign. I didn't look up. I kept my spoon moving through the pot of collard greens the way I have for 40 years, the way my mother did before me. I tasted them, added a pinch of salt, and then I said real quiet so she had to lean in to hear it. "Sit down, baby. Have some cornbread. You've got a long day ahead of you. You just don't know it yet." She smiled that smile she uses, the one that never reaches her eyes. See, they came into my kitchen that day to tell me I had nothing left, that I was old and slow and in the way, that the smartest thing an old woman like me could do was sign her name and disappear quietly into some nice facility with a garden. And I let them talk. Because here's a thing I've learned in 63 years on this earth. It is so much easier to count your enemies when they're absolutely certain you can't add. My name is Olivia Bennett. And before this story is over, every single person who looked right through me is going to learn how to see. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back. Let me show you how the world saw me, because you have to understand that first. You have to understand the woman they thought I was. For most of my life, I have been invisible in exactly the way the world likes its older women to be. I run a diner. Bennett's Kitchen on Auburn Avenue in the heart of Atlanta. Sweet Auburn, they call it, the street where Dr. King was born. The street that was once the richest black street in America. I've stood behind that counter since 1981. My husband Samuel and I opened it together with $1,100 and a recipe box that belonged to his grandmother. To the people who mattered in this story, I was the diner lady. I heard Vanessa call me that once on the phone to one of her friends. "Oh, I'm stuck dealing with Terrence's mother, the diner lady." You know how they get at that age. She didn't know I was standing right behind her refilling the sugar caddies. Or maybe she did. Maybe it didn't matter to her either way. My son Terrence, my only child, the boy I raised alone after Samuel passed, is a development director now. Big title. He works for a real estate company called Meridian Group, the kind of company that buys up whole neighborhoods and calls it revitalization. He wears good suits. He drives a car that beeps when you get too close to it. I am proud of him. I want you to know that before I tell you the rest. I have always been proud of my boy. But somewhere along the way, Terrence learned to talk about me instead of to me. Mama's not really equipped for these kinds of decisions. He'd say to Vanessa, sitting right there at my own table, eating a plate of food I cooked with my own 2 hands. We should just handle it for her. Equipped. Like I was the kitchen that needed remodeling. They had a whole plan for me, the 2 of them. I'd hear pieces of it whenever they came by. Sell the diner. The building's worth a fortune now, Mama. The neighborhood's changing. Move me into a place. There was a brochure once, left on my counter real casual like a receipt. Golden Meadows Senior Living. Pictures of white-haired women doing yoga and laughing at nothing. A place, they said, where I wouldn't have to work so hard anymore. Where I'd be taken care of. Nobody ever asked me if I wanted to be taken care of. Nobody asked me anything at all. The decisions got made in the space above my head the way grown folks used to talk over children. Now I want you to understand something about me because it's important for what comes later. I am not a woman who fights loud. My mother raised me in a time and a place where a black woman fighting loud could get her whole family hurt. She taught me a different kind of strength. The kind that watches, the kind that waits, the kind that keeps its cards face down on the table and lets everybody else show their hand first. So I didn't argue with Terrence and Vanessa. I smiled. I fed them. I let them believe every single thing they wanted to believe about me. But let me tell you about the diner so you understand what they were really trying to take. Every morning at 6, I open those doors and Cornelius Abernathy is waiting. 81 years old, fought in a war this country still hasn't properly thanked him for, and he sits in the 3rd stool from the end because that's where he sat with his late wife for 30 years. I keep that stool for him. Anybody tries to sit there, I move them gentle but firm. There's a young man, Darnell Fixes Cars, 2 blocks down, been out of steady work since the shop cut his hours. He eats at my counter 4 days a week and thinks I don't notice he can't always pay. I notice. I mark it down as paid anyway. His grandmother sat at this same counter when she was young. That's what a place like mine is. It's not a business. It's a memory that feeds people. I still wear the apron Samuel gave me in 1984. It's got a scorch mark on the corner from a grease fire in 91 that I never bothered to fix because Samuel laughed so hard the day it happened that keeping the mark felt like keeping a piece of the laugh. There's a cast iron skillet on my stove older than my son. It has never once been washed with soap. You Southern women listening know exactly what I mean. That's what the diner lady was protecting behind her invisible little smile. And that's what my daughter-in-law walked in one Tuesday afternoon and told me to sign away with dignity. Here's the thing. They never once stopped to wonder in all their planning and all their talking over my gray head. Why would a woman who owns nothing be so calm about losing everything? They thought I was poor. That was the foundation everything else was built on. Poor old widow clinging to a rundown diner, too proud or too foolish to cash out. In their minds, I was doing them a favor by finally getting out of the way, and they were doing me one right back. Let me tell you what was actually true. Back in 1979, 2 years before we even opened the diner, Samuel came home one night and sat me down at our little kitchen table and said something I never forgot. He said, "Livy, this street is going to be worth something someday. Not now. Now everybody's running away from it. But someday the money's going to come back looking for it. And when it does, I don't want us to be the ones getting run off. I want us to be the ones who stayed." He was a janitor at the time, cleaned office buildings downtown at night. But that man could see the future like it was written on the sidewalk. So we started saving. Not for a house, not for a fancy car. We saved to buy the block. We rented that first storefront for a while, and then in 1983 we bought the building the diner sits in. It was half condemned, and we got it for almost nothing because nobody wanted property on Auburn Avenue in 1983. We paid it off eating rice and beans, driving a car with a hole in the floor, taking exactly one vacation in 20 years. Then in 1989, the barbershop next door came up. We bought that too. Then the building on the corner in 94, the year Samuel's back gave out, and he had to quit the night job. We bought it anyway. Stretched ourselves so thin I cried at the kitchen table more than one night. But we bought it. Samuel passed in 2006, heart quiet in his sleep. The good Lord was kind to him at the end, even if he took him too soon for me. And I want you to hear this clearly because it's the center of everything. I did not stop after Samuel died. I kept buying. Over the next 15 years, quietly, one at a time, I bought 7 more properties on Auburn Avenue. The old pharmacy, the empty lot where the record store burned down, the row of storefronts across from the church. I bought them slow, and I bought them careful, and I bought them under a name that did not say Olivia Bennett anywhere on it. Because Samuel taught me one more thing, and it's the truest thing anybody ever told me. He said, "Livy wealth that shows gets taken, but wealth that hides gets to decide." So I hid it. All of it. Every deed I signed as Auburn Legacy Holdings, a quiet little company with a name that means nothing to anybody who isn't looking hard. On paper, Olivia Bennett owns a diner and a modest house. On paper, Olivia Bennett is exactly the poor old widow they thought she was. But behind that paper, I own very near half of the most valuable block in a neighborhood that everybody with money is suddenly desperately trying to get their hands on. I never told Terrence. That may be hard for some of you to understand, hiding something like that from your own child. But you have to understand when he changed. My boy grew up in this neighborhood poor, and somewhere along the way he got ashamed of it. Ashamed of where he came from. Ashamed, I think, sometimes of me. He married a woman who taught him that the past is something you escape from, not something you protect. And a woman does not hand the keys to her whole life's work to a child who's forgotten why the work mattered. So who did I trust? I trusted Gloria Pierce, who's been my best friend since 1978, who knows where every dollar and every deed is, and who would walk through fire for me and I for her. I trusted my lawyer Denise Caldwell, sharp as a blade, been handling my affairs quiet for 11 years. And I trusted a young man named Andre Coleman. Andre grew up 3 doors down from the diner. Sweet boy, no daddy, around a mama working 2 jobs. When he was 17 and smart as a whip and had nowhere near enough money for college, I paid for it. Quietly. Never told a soul, not even him. I ran it through a scholarship fund so he'd never have to feel like he owed me. He thought he won something. He earned it is the truth. He just needed somebody to open the door. Andre's grown now. Got himself a good job, a real career. He works at Meridian Group, the same company my son works for, the same company that's been circling Auburn Avenue like it's a carcass. Andre sits in those meetings. Andre hears the plans. And Andre has never once forgotten who paid for the education that put him in that room. He doesn't know everything about me. Nobody does. But he knows enough to pick up a phone. So that's the truth of it. That's the woman who stood in her kitchen calm as Sunday morning while her daughter-in-law told her to sign away her dignity. I'm not a poor old widow clinging to a diner. I am the landlord of the street they're trying to steal. I have been this whole time. And every one of them has been making their grand plans standing on ground that belongs to me. They just never bothered to read whose name was on the deed because they were so sure they already knew. That Tuesday after Vanessa left her papers on my counter and swept out the door, I closed up early. I turned the sign to closed. I sat alone in the empty diner as the light went gold through the front windows, and I took an old photograph out of my apron pocket. Samuel, 1979, standing on this same corner, young and skinny and grinning, one arm thrown out toward the whole street like he was introducing me to it. You were right, baby, I told him. The money came back looking for it, just like you said. And then I picked up the phone, and I called Denise Caldwell, and I said 4 words. Denise, it's starting. Get ready. 3 weeks after Vanessa left those papers on my counter, the Neighborhood Association held its monthly meeting in the Fellowship Hall of Mount Zion Baptist, same as it has every second Thursday for as long as anybody can remember. I've been going to those meetings for 40 years. Folding chairs, bad coffee, somebody's grandbaby crying in the back. It's where we talk about the streetlight that's been out on Edgewood, and whose nephew is selling plates to raise money for the choir robes, and what in the Lord's name is going to happen to our neighborhood now that the money has come back looking for it. That night, Meridian Group came to make a presentation. They set up a projector, slick pictures of what Auburn Avenue could be, glass and steel where the old storefront stood, coffee shops that charged $6 for a cup, little cartoon people walking little cartoon dogs, and not one of those cartoon people I noticed had a face like mine. And standing up front in a suit I'd never seen before, helping click through the slides, was my son. Terrence didn't look at me when he came in. Sat his wife down in the second row and stood up front by the men from Meridian like he belonged to them now. And maybe he did. I sat in the back, where I always sit. 3rd row from the door next to Gloria with my hands folded in my lap. The Meridian man talked for a while. Harold Grant, his name, was the CEO himself, come down to Sweet Auburn to bless us with his vision. Silver-haired, expensive teeth, the kind of man who says community like it's a word he learned for the occasion. He talked about partnership. He talked about progress. He talked about how change was coming to Auburn Avenue, whether we liked it or not. So wasn't it better to come along willingly? And then Vanessa stood up. Lord, she stood up in front of that whole room, my neighbors, my church family, people who've known me since before Terrence was born. And she smoothed her coat and she said, I think I can speak for the Bennett family here. The room got quiet. Because everybody knew the Bennett family. Everybody ate at the Bennett family's diner. My mother-in-law, Vanessa said, has given so much to this neighborhood for so many years. And she's tired. She's earned her rest. She turned and looked at me. Then and she put on that face, that soft, sorrowful, concerned face. The family has made the decision to sell the diner property to Meridian. It's the responsible thing. It's time someone competent handled these affairs before something gets mismanaged. Competent. She said it in a room full of people who'd trusted me with their weddings and their funerals and their children's graduation dinners. She stood there and told them the diner lady was too far gone to run her own life, and that she, Vanessa, was the competent one now. I felt every eye in that hall turn toward me. Gloria's hand found mine and squeezed so hard it hurt. I could feel her shaking with fury beside me. 45 years I've known that woman, and I know the difference between her scared shaking and her angry shaking. And this was the angry kind, the kind that would have had her on her feet hollering if I hadn't held her down. Because I did hold her down. I squeezed her hand back. Not yet, that squeeze said. Not yet. And then I did the hardest thing I did in this whole story. Harder than anything that came after. I stood up and I smiled. Thank you all, I said in my calm Sunday voice, for letting me be part of this neighborhood for so long. You've been my family. Every one of you. I picked up my purse. I think I'll head on home now. Y'all have a blessed evening. And I walked out. Straight back, head up, the way my mother taught me to walk out of every room that ever tried to make me small. I heard the whispers start before the door even closed behind me. Is it true? Is Miss Olivia really selling? Is she really, you know? Is her mind going? Out in the parking lot in the dark, I stopped by my car and I let myself breathe. Just for a second. My hands were shaking now too. Not the scared kind. Not the angry kind even. The ready kind. Because here's what my daughter-in-law didn't understand about what she'd just done. She'd stood up in a public meeting and announced a decision that wasn't hers to make. She'd told a room full of witnesses that I was incompetent. She'd put it on the record. I got in my car. I sat there a moment in the quiet. And I said out loud to nobody, to Samuel, to myself, "All right, you want to do this in public? We'll do it in public." I drove home, and I made a phone call. Now I have to tell you two stories at once, because two things were happening at the same time and neither side knew the whole of it. Let me tell you what they were doing first, because it'll make you sick, and it'll make you understand. Terrence and Vanessa were already spending money they didn't have. Gloria's granddaughter works at a real estate office over in Buckhead, and she called Gloria one afternoon just to gossip. Did she hear the Bennetts were buying a big house out in a fancy suburb? 4 bedrooms. Put down earnest money already. Told the agent they had a commission coming through on a big deal downtown. A commission on selling my building. They were spending my life's work on a house before I'd signed a single piece of paper. And it got worse. Vanessa had already toured Golden Meadows, that senior facility, from the brochure. Not to look at it, to reserve a room. She'd told them her mother-in-law would be moving in within the quarter pending some paperwork. She'd picked out the room, a small one, on the north side where the sun doesn't reach in the afternoon. They were so sure. That's the part I want you to sit with. They were so completely sure that it was already done. In their minds, I'd already signed. I'd already been packed away. The only thing left was the formality of getting an old woman's shaky signature on a line. They were building a whole future on top of me, and it never once occurred to them to check whether the ground would hold. Now let me tell you what I was doing. I sat down with Denise Caldwell in her office and I laid it all out. And Denise, Lord, I love that woman. Denise leaned back in her chair, took off her glasses, and started to smile. "Olivia," she said, "do they have any idea what you own?" "None," I said. "Not the first idea. And this Meridian project of theirs." She pulled up something on her computer. "Let me look at the parcels they'd need." She looked for a long time, and then she started to laugh. A real laugh, the kind that comes up from the belly. Here's what Denise found, and here's the thing that changes everything. Meridian's whole project was dead without me. The development they'd been planning, the glass and the steel, and the $6 coffee. It needed a continuous stretch of Auburn Avenue to work. You can't build a city block with holes in it. And right in the middle of the land they needed, right where they had to have it, were the properties owned by Auburn Legacy Holdings. Mine, all mine. They call them keystone parcels, like the stone in the middle of an arch. Pull it out, and the whole thing comes down. Meridian could not build their dream without buying my buildings. And they had no idea, not the slightest, that the buildings they needed and the diner lady they were shoving into a north-facing room were the same person. They thought they needed one signature from a confused old woman to get the diner. They actually needed to make a deal with the single most important property owner on the entire street. And that property owner had been sitting in the back row of every meeting in her 40-year-old apron saying thank you and have a blessed evening. But I didn't move yet. Understand me, this is the part where a lot of folks would have stood up too soon, walked into that meeting and slammed the deeds on the table and had their moment. I didn't want a moment. I wanted it done. I wanted it done so completely that no lawyer they hired and no trick they pulled could ever undo it. So I waited, and I watched. And Denise and I got everything in order, quiet as snowfall. And then Andre called me. I remember exactly where I was standing. Behind the counter, wiping down the espresso machine I bought last year that Vanessa doesn't know cost $11,000. It was after close. The phone rang, and it was Andre Coleman, and his voice was low and careful, the voice of a man who's about to tell you something he shouldn't. "Miss Olivia," he said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm." "I'm always calm, baby," I said. "You know that. It's about your son and his wife." He took a breath. "They're not just trying to get you to sell anymore. I heard them talking. Miss Olivia, they've been to see a lawyer about a conservatorship." I set down my rag. "Say that again," I said. "A conservatorship. They're going to try to have the court declare you can't handle your own affairs, so they can make the decisions for you, legally, whether you agree or not." His voice cracked a little. "They're building a file. Every time you forget something, every time you repeat yourself, they're writing it all down. Miss Olivia, they're trying to prove you're not, that your mind is—" "I understand," I said. And I did understand. I understood better than Andre knew. You see, a conservatorship is not like selling a building. If they got a judge to sign that paper, it wouldn't matter what I owned. It wouldn't matter about Auburn Legacy Holdings or the Keystone parcels or any of it. because a conservator controls everything. They'd have the legal right to sign my name for me, sell my property for me, put me in that north-facing room and lock the door, all with a judge's blessing, all perfectly legal, all for my own good. They weren't trying to buy my building anymore. They were trying to take away my right to say no. I thanked Andre. I told him he'd done a good thing and to keep his own name clear of it. I didn't want that boy losing the career I'd helped him build. I hung up the phone, and I stood alone in my dark diner for a long, long time. That's when I understood this wasn't about money at all. But even then, even knowing what I knew, nothing prepared me for the night they came to dinner. I should have seen it coming. I'd been so focused on the buildings, on the legal papers, on the chess game with Denise that I let myself forget the one thing that could still cut me. Because you can armor yourself against people trying to take your money. There's no armor for the other thing. They came on a Sunday. Terrence called that afternoon sweet as pie. "Mama, can we come by for dinner? Bring Maya, she's been asking about you." Maya, my granddaughter, 8 years old. The whole reason my heart still works. That child has been coming to my diner since before she could walk, sitting up on the counter, helping me stir, licking the spoon, falling asleep in the back booth to the sound of the dinner rush. She calls me Gigi. When she was 3, she couldn't say Grandma, and it came out Gigi and it stuck, and now I can't imagine being called anything else. Of course I said yes. I'd have said yes to anything that put that baby at my table. I cooked all afternoon. Fried chicken the way Maya likes it crispy, mac and cheese from the cast iron, greens, peach cobbler. I set my good table. I put on my nice blouse. Some part of me, the mama part, the part that never stops hoping, thought, maybe this was them coming around. Coming home. Maybe we'd sit down like a family and figure it out. They ate my food. All of it. Terrence had seconds. Maya sat next to me and showed me a drawing she made of the two of us in front of the diner stick figures holding hands, and I put it on my refrigerator right there where it still hangs today. And then when the plates were cleared, Vanessa reached into her bag and set a folder on my table. Different papers this time. "Mama Olivia," she said in that soft, concerned voice, "we need to talk about something. As a family." Terrence wouldn't look at me, kept his eyes on his empty plate. And Vanessa slid that folder across my own table and opened it, and I saw the words at the top of the page. "Petition for appointment of conservator. We've been so worried about you," Vanessa said. "The forgetting, the confusion. Mr. Abernathy told us you gave him the wrong change twice last week." I hadn't. "We've talked to a doctor and to a lawyer. And we all think, Mama Olivia, that it would be best if Terrence could just help manage things for you, officially. So nobody can take advantage of you. So nobody can take advantage of me." I looked at my son. "Terrence," I said, "is this what you want?" And he said, "God forgive him." He said, "It's for your own good, Mama." I could have handled that. I want you to know I could have. I've survived worse than a grown child too weak to look his mother in the eye. I'd have stood up from that table and started the war right then. But then I reached out to Maya, just to touch her hair, just to steady myself with the one pure thing in that room. And my granddaughter, my Maya, my baby, who has never once in her life been anything but sunshine to me, flinched. She pulled her hand back. She pulled away from me, and she looked up at me with something in her eyes I had never seen there before. Fear. She was afraid of me. "Mommy says your brain is sick now," she whispered. "Mommy says I have to be careful because you might not know things right anymore." The room went very quiet. I have stood at my husband's grave. I have buried my own mother. I have worked 18-hour days on swollen feet and cried in the walk-in cooler where nobody could hear me and come back out smiling to serve the lunch rush. I have been called names and passed over and looked right through more times than there are days in a year. I have never in 63 years felt anything like what I felt when that baby pulled her hand away from me. They hadn't just come for my building. They hadn't just come for my right to say no. They had reached into the heart of the only pure love I had left, and they had poisoned it. They had taught my grandbaby to be afraid of her Gigi, to make their lie easier, to close the last door. I don't remember them leaving. Vanessa said something about giving me time to think about it. Terrence mumbled something I didn't hear. The door closed, and I was alone. I sat at that table with the dishes still out, and Maya's drawing on the refrigerator, and for the first time in this entire story, for the first time in longer than I can remember, I put my face in my hands, and I wept. Not for the diner, not for the money, not for the buildings or the block or the 40 years of work. I wept because the boy I carried and raised alone and put through school on tips and prayers had signed his name to a piece of paper that said his mother had lost her mind, and he'd taught his daughter to believe it. That was the bottom. I want you to know that was the bottom, so you understand what it took to climb back up. That night in my dark kitchen, I felt like I had already lost. But somewhere down there at the bottom underneath the grief, something else was waiting. Cold and clear and steady. Samuel used to say the same thing every time life knocked us down. He'd help me up and he'd wipe my face and he'd say, "All right, Livy, now we know exactly who they are. And a person who shows you exactly who they are has just handed you the map." I wiped my own face this time. I stood up in my empty kitchen. I looked at that petition sitting on my table, and I picked up the phone and I called Denise Caldwell, and it was near midnight, but she answered and I said, "They filed for conservatorship. They're going to try to prove I'm not in my right mind." I took a breath. Denise, let them try. Let them get all the way up in front of that judge so sure of themselves with all their witnesses and their papers. Olivia? And then I said we're going to show that whole courtroom exactly whose mind they should have been worried about. Here is a thing about the law that Terrence and Vanessa did not understand, because they had never in their lives had to fight for anything the slow way. A conservatorship does not happen at a dinner table. It happens in a courtroom in front of a judge on the public record. And it takes weeks. They filed their petition, and then they had to wait. And so did I. Those were long weeks. I won't pretend otherwise. Vanessa kept up her performance the whole time, calling to check on me, dropping by with a doctor she'd found who asked me strange questions and wrote things down. There was a court-ordered evaluation coming, a specialist who'd decide whether Olivia Bennett still had all her marbles. They were counting on that evaluation. They'd built their whole case on the idea that a tired old woman put under pressure in a strange office would get flustered and confused and prove their point for them. What they didn't know is that while they waited, I was working. Denise and I met almost every day, not to prepare me to seem competent. I didn't need help with that. We were preparing something else. We were getting every deed, every title, every record of Auburn Legacy Holdings organized and certified and ready. We were documenting the earnest money Terrence and Vanessa had put down on that suburban house, the commission they were counting on, and Andre, careful from the outside, confirmed the one last thing I needed to know. Because there was something even Andre hadn't understood at first. Something about why Vanessa was in such a hurry. Let me tell you what Denise found. Vanessa was not just trying to sell my building to Meridian. Vanessa had made a private deal with a different company. A rival developer named Preston Calloway, Meridian's biggest competitor, a man who'd lose the whole Auburn Avenue project if Meridian got there first. Calloway had promised Vanessa a payment. A big one. A private one that Terrence knew nothing about if she could deliver control of the Bennett properties to him instead of to Meridian. Do you see it now? Do you see what my daughter-in-law was really doing? She wasn't helping the family. She was going to take control of me through that conservatorship, sell my property out from under everybody, pocket a secret payment from Calloway, and leave both Meridian and her own husband holding nothing. She was going to betray the company Terrence worked for. She was going to betray Terrence himself. My son wasn't her partner in this. My son was just one more person she was using. And I want to tell you why, because I promised you I wouldn't make her a monster with no reason. I found out later from Gloria, who found out from somebody, that Vanessa came up as poor as I did. Poorer, maybe. Grew up in a neighborhood just like Sweet Auburn, and spent her whole life running from it, terrified of ever being poor again, terrified of being the kind of woman the world looks right through. She looked at my diner and my apron and my neighborhood, and she didn't just see something worthless. She saw the thing she was most afraid of becoming. That doesn't make it right. Nothing makes it right. But I've lived long enough to know that the people who try hardest to bury you are usually running from a grave of their own. So now I had it all. The deeds, the Keystone parcels, the secret deal with Calloway, the false medical claims, the earnest money, every piece. And I made a decision that Denise argued with me about. I told her, don't stop the hearing, don't file a motion to dismiss, don't warn anybody. Let it happen. Olivia, Denise said, I can make this whole thing disappear with one phone call. You don't have to walk into that courtroom. I know I don't, I said. But she stood up in my church, Denise, in front of my whole neighborhood, and told them I was too far gone to run my own life. She taught my grandbaby to be scared of me. She wants to do this in public. I folded my hands. So we're going to finish it in public, where everybody can see. The hearing was on a Thursday morning in a courtroom downtown, and it was fuller than they expected. Terrence was there in his good suit, looking like he hadn't slept. Vanessa was there, cool and pressed sure of herself, with the family's lawyer beside her. And in the back, because his deal depended on the outcome, because Meridian couldn't close on Auburn Avenue until the question of the Bennett property was settled, sat Harold Grant, the CEO himself, silver hair and expensive teeth, come to watch an old woman get put away. There was press there, too. Not big press. The neighborhood paper and a young woman with a phone who ran the Sweet Auburn community page that everybody follows. Word had gotten around. They're trying to take Miss Olivia's diner. They're saying her mind's gone. My neighbors had come. Cornelius Abernathy was there in his good hat. Gloria sat in the front row with her chin up like a queen. Their lawyer stood up first and made their case. Painted the picture they'd built: the forgetful widow, the mismanaged business, the concerned family stepping in out of love. Vanessa dabbed at her eyes at the right moments. It was a good performance. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed it myself. And then the judge, a black woman about my age, with reading glasses down on her nose and eyes that had seen every kind of foolishness a courtroom can hold. The judge looked over at me and said, "Mrs. Bennett, is your attorney present? Do you understand these proceedings?" Gee. And I stood up. I hadn't worn my apron that day. I hadn't worn my simple blouse or my Sunday dress. Denise had helped me pick out a suit, deep blue, sharp, the kind of thing a woman wears when she means business. And I stood up straight, the way my mother taught me, and I said, "I understand them perfectly, Your Honor. Better than anyone in this room, I expect." Denise rose beside me. "Your Honor, Denise Caldwell, representing Mrs. Bennett. Before the court rules on this petition, my client has documentation she'd like to enter into the record. I think the court will find it changes the nature of these proceedings entirely." The judge nodded. "Proceed." And I walked to the front of that courtroom, and I set my folder down on the table, and I turned around so I could see all of them. Terrence, Vanessa, Harold Grant in the back. I looked right at Grant. And I said the thing I'd waited my whole life to say. "And Mr. Grant, for 3 years now your company has been trying to buy this street. And in 3 years of meetings you have called me the old woman in the diner. You never once asked my name." The room was silent. "Allow me to introduce myself properly." I opened the folder. "My name is on the deed to nearly every building on the block you're trying to buy, including the one you've been trying to build your whole project around. I am Auburn Legacy Holdings. I always have been. You didn't need one signature from a confused old woman, Mr. Grant. You needed to make a deal with me, and you were too busy looking past me to notice. I have never in my life heard a room go so quiet." Harold Grant's face. I wish you could have seen it. All that expensive certainty draining right out of it. Because in that 1 second, the man understood. The project he'd staked his whole reputation on. The deal his board was pressuring him to close. The thing that would save his job. Every bit of it depended on the woman he'd never once bothered to look at. But I wasn't done. Because there was still the matter of the petition. The matter of my son and his wife trying to have me declared out of my mind. Denise stepped forward and laid the rest of it out clean and cold and undeniable. The medical claims, the forgetting, the wrong change, every one of them false, and she had the real witnesses to prove it. Cornelius Abernathy stood right up in that courtroom, 81 years old, in his good hat, and said, "I never told anybody Miss Olivia gave me wrong change. That is a bald-faced lie, and I'll say so to anybody." And then Denise laid down the last piece. The deal with Preston Calloway. She had the record of it. The private payment Vanessa had been promised. The plan to seize control of me, sell everything out from under both Meridian and her own husband, and walk away with a secret payout. The whole courtroom turned to look at Vanessa, and I watched my daughter-in-law's face do something I'll never forget. I watched the mask come off. Not all at once, piece by piece. The soft, concerned face she'd worn for years, the loving daughter-in-law face, it just slid right off, and underneath was something cold and cornered and caught. But the person I was watching wasn't Vanessa. It was Terrence. Because my son turned and looked at his wife, and I saw the exact moment he understood. That she'd been using him. That the woman he'd left his mother for had been planning to leave him too, to sell him out same as she'd sold out everybody. That every word she'd whispered in his ear about his poor, confused mother had been in service of a betrayal that included him. Terrence stood up. In the middle of a courtroom, in the middle of the ruin of everything, my boy stood up, and he looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in years, and his face just broke. "Mama," he said, and his voice cracked right down the middle. "Mama, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." The judge did not need long. She dismissed the petition on the spot. She had some sharp words for Vanessa and her lawyer about the misuse of the court and the falsifying of medical claims, and she said the word fraud more than once, and she said the matter would be referred to people who handle such things. Vanessa and her lawyer left that courtroom fast, and Vanessa did not look back, and that is the last time I saw her face to face. But I want to be clear about something, because I know some of you are hoping for it. I did not chase her. I did not scream or gloat or watch her led away in handcuffs. The truth was enough. The truth she'd built her whole scheme on the hope that nobody would ever look for the truth did all the work I needed it to do. She'd spent years betting that no one would look closely at the old woman in the diner. Turned out the old woman had been looking closely at her the whole time. Now you'd think the story ends there. Old woman wins, wipes them all out, buys her mansion, rides off. That's not the story. That was never the story. Because I didn't do any of this to win. I did it to protect something. And winning and protecting are not the same thing. Let me tell you what I did next. This is the part that matters most. Harold Grant came to see me at the diner, 2 days after the hearing. Hat in his hands, so to speak. His whole project was in my hands now, and he knew it, and he was ready to write me a check bigger than I'd ever seen in my life to make his problem go away. I made him a cup of coffee, sat him down at the counter, and I told him no, because here is what I did with everything I'd spent 40 years building. This is the piece I never told a soul, not Terrence, not Vanessa, not Andre. Only Gloria and Denise ever knew. Years ago, quietly, I had set it all in motion, and now with Denise I finished it. Every property, every deed, all of it I put into a thing called an irrevocable community land trust. I named it after my husband, the Samuel Bennett Community Land Trust. Do you know what that means? It means those buildings can never be sold off. Not by me, not by Terrence, not by anybody who comes after. It means the diner and the barbershop and the storefronts and the old pharmacy, they stay in the hands of the neighborhood at rents the neighborhood can afford forever. It means Cornelius Abernathy's stool is safe. It means Darnell can still eat at my counter. It means when the money comes back looking for Sweet Auburn, and it always comes back, it cannot run our people off. Because I made sure. I made it permanent. I made it so no scheme and no signature and no cornered woman with a cold heart could ever undo it. I never wanted to be rich, you understand. I wanted to be the one who stayed. Just like Samuel said all those years ago at our little kitchen table, I told Harold Grant he could build his project, but only around us. Only with us, only if every family and every business already on that street stayed protected at rents they could pay. Take it or leave it. He took it. What else could he do? The keystone was mine. And then there was my son. Terrence came to me, after it all, broken and ashamed and free of that woman at last. He came and he sat where Harold Grant had sat, and he cried and he asked me to forgive him. And I want to tell you what I told him, because some of you have a Terrence in your life, and you need to hear it. I said, baby, I love you. I have loved you every second of every day since before you were born, and I will love you until I die, and that has never once been in question. He started to say something, and I stopped him. But love and trust are two different things. Forgiveness you can ask for, and you have it, son, you have it. But trust, I shook my head. Trust you don't ask for. Trust you cook from scratch, a little bit at a time, every day, until there's enough of it to feed somebody. He didn't understand. So I told him plain. The diner opens at 6. Saturday mornings I could use a hand with the dishes, same as you did when you were a boy. I looked him in the eye. You show up at 6 every Saturday and you wash those dishes, and you don't do it for show, and you don't do it for money, and you don't do it to get your name back in the will. You do it because you finally remember who you come from. And we'll see, son. Little by little, we'll see. And I want you to know he showed up. That Saturday and the one after and the one after that. 6 in the morning, sleeves rolled up, hands in the dishwater, quiet. He's still coming. It's not fixed. It may never be all the way fixed, but it's cooking. Slow. And Maya, the first time she came back to the diner, she was shy. Still a little scared, I think. Children believe what grown folks tell them, and she'd been told her Gigi's mind was sick. She hung back by the door, holding her daddy's hand. I didn't rush her. I just did what I always do. I got out the little stool, and I set it by the counter where it's always been, and I started stirring a pot, and I didn't say a word. And after a while, the way children do, she came, climbed up on her stool, watched me stir. Gigi, she said, is your brain okay now? And I said, baby, my brain is just fine. It always was. Sometimes grown-ups get things wrong. Even mommies. Even daddies. But you and me, I handed her the spoon. You and me are always going to be just fine. She stirred that pot, and she licked the spoon, and she laughed. And I had everything back that I'd ever really been fighting for. It's been a while now. The diner's still open. 6 in the morning every day, same as always. The neighborhood's changing. The money did come back, just like Samuel said, but it's changing with us now, not over top of us. Cornelius still has his stool. Darnell still eats free and thinks I don't notice. There's a new coffee shop across the street that charges $6 a cup, and sometimes those customers wander into my place by mistake, and they always come back the next day on purpose. Terrence washes dishes on Saturdays. Maya sits on her stool, and Vanessa is gone off chasing whatever she's running from, and I wish her no harm, and I don't think about her much at all. People ask me sometimes if I was scared through all of it, if I ever thought I'd lose, and I tell them the truth. For 63 years, the world looked right past me. Thought I was slow because I was quiet. Thought I was weak because I was kind. Thought I had nothing because I never showed what I had. Turns out that's the best place in the whole world to stand, because they spent all those years looking straight through me. I used that time to build something they never saw coming.